My name is David Hopper, and this video is part of a 26-part series that follows the alphabet from A to Z, each letter representing an important part of the launch process for new ministries, new campuses, and new churches. In this video, we're talking about R, reproducing. The term you might hear with this letter of the alphabet is planting pregnant. Kind of a graphic way of describing that our ministries need to be reproducing, but it does put a picture in your mind of what we're talking about here. When we launched our church in Clovis, we had a mission of reaching the 6.5 million people in the Central Valley of California. The only way that we were going to even put a dent into that mission is if on day one we talked about where we're going to plant next. I looked at the valley and I noticed that all the cities are close to each other, but there were these chasms of farmland in between the cities. It'd be like the freeways in Southern California. There are these unspoken boundaries that people really didn't cross. Freeways are a weird mind thing that happens in Southern California. Farmland works that way in the valley. We were planting in Clovis, and we planted knowing that we'd soon be planting in Sanger, Visalia, Fresno, Madera. All these cities are really within 10 minutes from where we planted, but they had these unspoken chasms in between. As you think about where you're planting, what's the bigger picture of what you're trying to accomplish? As you launch a new ministry, a campus, or a church, can you go into it pregnant with the bigger mission of reaching people with the message of Jesus Christ? This one is hard for a lot of people. You're barely able to wrap your head around what you're trying to launch right now, and you want me to think about the next launch after it? Yes, here's why. The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. It's a Luke 10 reference. People are going to come along and tell you as you first start that you have enough churches. You're going to hear all these negative things about how churches that already exist need your help, and you're taking their best people away. All you need to do is pull the latest stats that are pretty easy to find to tell you that people who say those kind of things really have no idea what they're talking about. We need far more churches. We need churches to plant every year just to keep up with the growth rate of our world. There are far more churches closing their doors than opening them. On and on we can go with how important this is, but I don't think you would have made it to level R if you didn't already know all of this. What you may not realize is the workers are few and you are a worker. Again, you wouldn't be here if you were not a worker. So you need to be thinking about the next launches because there's just not enough people thinking that big. There's not enough people like you. You need to be the one thinking that big. If not you, then who? Perhaps you're here for such a time as this. Here's another reason this is important, and I will actually make this the number one reason. There's not enough of you is just a bonus. Here's the real number one. If you're building disciples the right way, this will be inevitable. Jesus has commanded us to make disciples, not followers of you, but followers of Him. The more we are making disciples who follow Jesus, these are going to be disciple makers, meaning they go and make disciples who make disciples. As you build disciple makers, you're going to need to launch churches with these disciples who have this gift of apostolic leadership. These are the entrepreneur leaders that if you don't launch, they'll be stifled in their gifts for God. The second reason that you want to be thinking about reproducing ministries is you have a race issue. This is my way of saying no matter what race you are, there is a race you are not. This actually goes way beyond race, by the way. There are social economical differences, sex differences, personality differences, and a lot more differences that you need to be launching others to reach who God tells us to reach. Who did God tell us to reach? Well, Jesus commanded us to make disciples among every group of people on the planet in every place. So unless you really can be all things to all people, you're going to need to launch others to accomplish Jesus' command. We need to think bigger. It actually really bothers me how small our thinking is. According to Pew Research Center, in 1900, the Korean Peninsula was 1% Christian. 100 years later, the Center for the Study of Global Christianity reported that there were thousands of churches with over 14 million followers of Jesus in South Korea alone. According to the Korea World Missions Association, they are second only to the U.S. in terms of sending missionaries, which is pretty amazing when you realize they're only the size of California and Florida combined. Just imagine a country today that's less than 1% Christian. Think Afghanistan. And can you imagine 100 years from now, thousands of churches there with 10 million plus followers of Jesus who are now spreading and sending the gospel around the world? How does that happen? Do you believe that can happen? If you go into whatever you're launching with this kind of mindset of reproducing, you can get there. It will cause you to be on your knees in prayer, continuing to stay focused on God's mission for this world rather than your own. Which brings us to part 3 of Reproducing Ministries. It takes prayer. Here's how it happened in South Korea. They prayed every morning at 5 a.m. Literally, they gathered in their churches and they prayed. They did the same thing all night on Friday nights, and they're still doing it every morning and every Friday night. They realized that the church wasn't intended to multiply based upon their natural ingenuity, but rather on God's supernatural capability. If you're thinking about reproducing from day one, you'll be less inclined to stop and think about how great you are, how great a thing you're doing, how awesome your accomplishments are. Instead, you'll continue to think about God's call for us as ambassadors in this world. One of the most challenging parts for me working in the church is to hear our pastors constantly talk about what their church is going to do next. And that's the good ones. At least they're talking about something. It is rare, though, to hear a church that is developing the next leaders to send out away from their church. And the next leaders that are going to launch ministries, the next leaders that are going to launch churches. How are we so self-centered? It can't just be about what we're going to do next with this one tiny speck of property on the globe. We've got to start with a much bigger mindset of God's vision for our world, which also goes back to thinking about the inner city, the deep parts that don't have big givers, the feared areas, the dismissed, the overlooked, the mission field. God is not just in those growing suburban areas with lots of young families. The way that we talk about planting, it kind of gives the impression that God can only use us in one place. Let's pray bigger dreams or God-sized vision. Based on figures from the Joshua Project and the Center of the Study of Global Christianity, there are over 2 billion people in over 7,000 people groups that identify as unreached, which means they don't have access to the gospel in a way that they can understand it or accept it. They're unlikely to hear the gospel in their lifetime unless something changes. In order to reach the unreached people around the world, in order to reach the hard places in North America, it's going to take resolve to go where others aren't going, to do what others aren't doing, to pay a price that others are not willing to pay. We need to be in prayer constantly to have the eyes and the vision of God. As we think about reproducing ministries, the fourth point of thought here is healthy things grow. Think about churches that die. You see them in every town, every denomination. Are they healthy when they die? What have they lost sight of? When we are young, newly married, fit, healthy, what do most of us do? We have kids. Now, obviously, this metaphor does not describe everyone, but hopefully you see the idea. Those are some of the best years of our life. Not easy, don't get me wrong, lots of sleepless nights, but healthy things grow, and on our healthiest days, we're usually having children. The church is the same way. The churches reproducing are most likely the healthiest ones out there. Which do you want to be as you're launching a new mission forward? I want to encourage you to put this into your DNA early. It will keep you healthy. God has designed the church to preach and teach His word, pray in the power of His Spirit, grow in His image, express His love, and make disciples of more people. When these things are happening, churches multiply. I can't say this strong enough. If you're not a church thinking about this subject and doing something about it, you're probably not a healthy church. As you launch something new, decide to be healthy on day one and stay healthy through the entire life of this thing you're launching. Your homework for this chapter goes like this. Matthew 28 says, "Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I have commanded you." What are the strategies that you're implementing into your launch to accomplish this mission of being a disciple maker who makes disciple makers? At the beginning of this video, I said, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. This is a verse that a lot of people know from Luke 10. Problem is, most people don't know the details around why it was said. The Lord himself is sending 72 leaders in twos to go out ahead of every place he's going to go. Think about that for a second. The church loves to talk about the 12 disciples, but within about 12 months, that number is actually 72. This was a reproducing ministry from day one. Where do you think these 72 people came from? Jesus says, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. He then adds, I'm sending you out like lambs among wolves. He doesn't talk about fundraising and a huge preparation plan with lots of nets to make sure you're going to be all right. His next line is, do not take a purse or a bag or sandals. Jesus was on mission. Go. Do we think that mission has changed? I don't think so. We need to have the same mindset. I'm going. I'm going to create disciples and I'm going to send them. I'm raising others up to take over what I've started so I can go to the next one. This is how we have a moment like what happened in South Korea. As long as we bathe this whole thing in prayer, that will happen. Back to the homework. The homework before our next coaching session is to interview a church that you see has reproducing ministries. What are their strategies to make disciple makers? How have they been successful in launching new ministries in campuses or churches? What are the key fundamentals or takeaways that you want to add to what you're launching? These questions will be in the description of this video. I can't wait to learn about a great church that's living this call from Jesus himself in our lives. Next time, we'll be talking about S, which is success attitudes. Can't wait, do the homework, and I'll see you in the next video.